Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first full day of SFS 2026. My name is Jim Hood. I'm from Ohio State University and one of the co-chairs of this meeting. And I just have a couple of announcements before we start our day. So first, the fun run is happening on Tuesday at 7 a.m. There are still tickets available to this event, so I encourage you, if you're a runner or a walker, to go out and sign up for the fun run. You can buy tickets at the registration desk. The Early Career Committee is creating a freshwater science starter kit, and they need your help. And so this kit will serve as a resource for early career faculty who are creating new labs. And so if you have documents including things like startup lists, lab manuals, or templates for reference letters, or anything else that you think would help a new assistant professor, please commit to sharing them. You can scan the QR code here, or on the flyer near the silent auction table. And if you commit to contributing a document, you can compete for a raffle ticket and a chance to win a gift certificate to your local coffee shop. The raffle is located on the table with the merchandise for sale, and you'll be contacted after the meeting to get the documents. So if you're a first-time attendee at the SFS annual meeting, welcome. As our president, Sally Entrikin, reminded us yesterday, everyone here wearing a name badge is your SFS friend. But if you want to meet and get to know some of the other first-time attendees, there's a meetup in this ballroom right after the plenary between 10:30 and 11 during the coffee break. So I encourage you to come. Also a reminder that tonight is the Student Resources Committee live auction and bingo. This will take place in the DoubleTree Hotel from 8:30 to 10:30, and this follows the Student Mentor Mixer, which is from 6 to 8:30. Show your support for SRC, the Student Resources Committee, and many of the programs they support by bidding on auctions donated by fellow SFS members. They're out here, including crafts, swag, and more. The live auction will be followed by musical bingo. Please remember to join us for the Society's annual membership business meeting tomorrow. It's on Tuesday from 3 to 5 p.m. This isn't during lunch like it is normally, so it's from 3 to 5 on Tuesday. You will hear from the Society leadership on our activities over the past year and our plans for the future. You can also help celebrate our 2026 Endowment Award recipients who will be recognized. And most importantly, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions and make suggestions to the board. Please take a moment to submit those ahead of time using the QR code on the slide. All right, just a reminder for all the special session moderators in the room, your timekeeping card's been placed on the podium in each room by our event staff. All right, and then one last reminder about a very special event taking place tomorrow night from 7 to 9 in the Conference Center Theater. Please join Freshwater Illustrated, Rios to Rivers, and the Tribal Water Media Fellowship Program from Fort Lewis College for an evening of water storytelling through film and media with a focus on tribal and indigenous water topics and perspectives. This is a showcase. This showcase will highlight exciting films from Freshwater Illustrated catalog, as well as films and media projects from student creators from the Fort Lewis College's Tribal Water Media Fellowship Program. For a preview of some of those films you'll be seeing, we have prepared a few clips for you.
They call me water. I have many roles, but one that is important above all else. That's to support life, because I am life itself. I feel just as much as the living. I see just as much as the living. I hear just as much as the living. I hear changes. I feel changes. And I see changes. Changes that are affecting the ones that I love. Although my time in one place is forever moving, where I am at a moment's time is my home. My existence shows me every river bend, every cliff, every pocket of space I can fill. Beautiful spaces that I will remember forever. Because I can hear, I can see, I can feel. Because just as the living, I too am living.
Okay guys, today it is really windy out here. The wind is pushing me back a lot, but we're staying strong.
It's day 29, we're at Upper Village.
I am a tribal citizen of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes.
The Yurok tribe.
The Maori team, Takana tribe.
I'm from China.
Mapuche Pehuenche del territorio del Alto Biobío.
We are approximately 10 miles close to the ocean, which is crazy.
I feel good and excited and tired, but dizzy.
3 miles tomorrow and then we're done.
My first notice of eel starting to go downhill was 1972 at Cougar Canyon Bridge on South Fork of the Salmon River. I was down there salmon fishing. One lone eel came up through the sands. Coming upstream, I could see him in the sand. I watched him way down, maybe an eighth of a mile away. I seen him. He came up, swam under the bridge. I followed him for another half mile or so, not knowing why. He disappeared into the deep water. That was the end of my journey with him. But when I got back to camp, I thought about this and I thought about it. And I wondered why the Creator showed me that one lone eel. And it dawned on me why. I always wondered, did I see the last one in the South Fork of the Salmon River?
All right, so as you can see, this is going to be a really special and amazing event with great films. Just a reminder, that's Tuesday night from 7 to 9 in the Conference Center Theater. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's my honor today to introduce the 2026 cohort of Society Fellows. And I'm going to start with Nick Allman. He recently retired in 2025 after 12 years with the U.S. Geological Survey, which is the organization I also work with, so this is a point of pride. And he served as the Deputy Regional Director, and he oversaw the Greater Everglades Priority Ecosystem Sciences Program, which is quite a large and very important restoration and science effort. So this included high-quality management relevant USGS science for the Everglades restoration, and it was developed in close collaboration with many, many partners. Before that, he was an aquatic ecologist for the Everglades National Park, leading an interdisciplinary team of scientists working on those water quality issues. He was also the research director at South Florida Water Management District, directing 120 plus scientists. Also in support of Everglades restoration. It's just such a monumental effort. He received his BS and MS in biology at the University of West Florida and PhD in microbial ecology at Oregon State University, and was a faculty member in the biology department at the University of Mississippi, receiving tenure before returning to Florida to work on the Everglades. He is currently a visiting professor at the School of Natural Resources and the Environment at the University of Florida, helping those early career faculty engage in Everglades science. He has been active in the Society for Freshwater Science ever since attending his first meeting in 1981. And Nick has always been a fixture at these meetings for me. And one thing that was not included on the CV was, as far as I know, the only advice columnist for the Society for Freshwater Science. He had a long-running column called Ask Nick. It would come out in the weekly, in the Society newsletters, and it was just great. Read a couple of blurbs from the support letters that Nick received. His leadership has guided ecosystem restoration and resource management nationally. His research on microbial processes and wood decomposition and solute dynamics was pivotal in the emergence of these important ideas in aquatic ecology. It's really foundational work. His selfless dedication in the society in any capacity, from president to assisting and mentoring young scientists to simply helping, has helped, when asked, has helped advance the science and the standing of the society, making it the wonderful, supportive entity it is today. I'm going to read one more blurb, and this one really struck me. Managing large ecosystem restoration projects is not for the faint of heart. Nick, is that a fair and accurate statement? Yes. In the Everglades, there's constant political pressure from agriculture, utilities, development, and environmental sectors for water, and balancing these competing demands requires intuition, acumen, and savvy. Nick is graced with all these qualities, and this is evidenced in his ability to navigate these potentially treacherous waters and still generate positive outcomes. Please join me in welcoming Next up is Dr. Mark Gessner, an ecosystem ecologist with a long-standing interest in freshwater. Much of his research focuses on understanding of consequences of global environmental change on the functioning biodiversity of streams, wetlands, and lakes. So right there, we're getting a sense of the breadth of Dr. Gessner's work. So it's across all different types of freshwater ecosystems, including the topics I'll get to here in a minute. The fundamental questions he addresses are how organisms affect ecosystem processes and how environmental contexts and human activities have shaped those relationships. He obtained his PhD at the University of Freiburg, Germany in 1991, following research conducted at the CNRS in France on the role of aquatic fungi in driving leaf decomp in streams. He recently retired as a professor at the Technische Universität Berlin and as department head and former acting director of the Leibniz School or Institute of Freshwater Ecology and Inland Fisheries, the IGB. He remains there as a guest scientist and holds adjunct professorships at Australian Rivers Institute, ARI, at Griffith University, and is affiliated with the biology faculty of the University of Dresburg-Essen in Germany. So that gives you just a sense of the international reach of Dr. Gessner's work. His interest in ecosystem research took him to Trent University in Ontario, just all over the world. University of Kiel in Germany, EVOG, and ETH, Zurich, Berlin, Stanford, in California, Griffith University in Australia. He's been serving on various editorial boards throughout his career and spent many years as a special issues editor for freshwater biology and numerous other national and international committees, including Diversitas, the scientific council of the CNRS in France, and recently is chair of the midterm review at the Experimental Lakes area in Canada. Again, just a testament to the international reach of his career. In 2005, he was awarded a titular professorship at ETH Zurich, and in 2019 received an honorary doctorate from the University of Toulouse in France. And then he is also a fellow of the Freshwater Biological Association based in the UK. And currently, he serves as the president-elect of the Society of Freshwater Science. Read a couple of testaments from the letters of support that really struck me. Foremost among Mark's qualifications for becoming an SF Fellow is the fact that he is an internationally recognized research scientist of the highest caliber. He is always ready to acknowledge the contributions of others and blessed with an ego that is well under control. He does not insist on the personal limelight. And I think, that speaks a little bit to the spirit of the collaborative nature of this society. His published contributions are outstanding, reflecting the reach, and that's the breadth. I was speaking about the reach of his collaborations in areas bridging eutrophication, climate change, biodiversity, ecotoxicology, and his work in that field particularly inspired some of the things that led to where I am today, along with many others. His contributions to the workings of science beyond his own research interests have also been astonishing. He has played key leadership roles at the places where his career has taken him, including EVOG in Switzerland and the IGB in Berlin. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Mark Gessner and congratulating him on this honor. Okay, and I want to introduce you now to Dr. Alonso Ramirez, a professor at the Department of Applied Ecology at NC State University, and his research investigates the ecology of tropical and urban streams, with a particular focus on aquatic macroinvertebrates and the vital role of long-term studies in ecological understanding. In his lab, Dr. Ramirez pursues two primary missions: evaluating how climate change, in particular droughts and hurricanes, shape tropical stream dynamics, and assessing the impact of urbanization on aquatic biota and ecosystem processes. Originally from Costa Rica, Dr. Ramirez earned his undergraduate degree at the National University of Costa Rica before completing his master's and PhD at the University of Georgia. And my time at the Institute of Ecology overlapped with Alonzo's, and within our cohort, he was so well known for his work ethic. In addition to doing all of the amazing experiments and field studies, he was just always toiling away describing the diversity and taxonomy of tropical Odonata. And we always were just so impressed by that. He then served as a distinguished tenure as professor of the University of Puerto Rico and joined NC State University faculty in 2018 to continue his work on tropical and urban ecosystems. Some points from the letters. His career epitomizes an ideal nominee for SF Fellow. His longevity and impact on tropical stream ecology, decades of dedicated service to SFS across all levels of leadership. Past president. His unparalleled successful initiative to empower the Latin American scientific community makes him an exceptionally deserving candidate. All of these letters emphasize not only has Alonzo broadened our understanding of stream ecosystems, particularly in the tropics, but he has broadened this society with his efforts to promote the research of others. One more thing that I would share along those lines: in all of his professional endeavors, especially his teaching, advising, and research, he has vastly broadened the international perspectives of freshwater science by revealing mechanisms of how tropical systems work and empowering and training scholars from across the Americas. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Ramirez.
So I'm now going to introduce our two plenary speakers for this morning, and they're going to, in many ways, give a joint talk, so I'm going to introduce both of them now. So first, Dr. Tullis is the minor endowed professor of biological and ecological engineering at Oregon State University. She received her PhD in biological engineering from North Carolina State University, 2005. Her honors include designation as an American Geophysical Union Voices for Science Fellow in 2021. She received a Fulbright Fellowship to study in Taiwan in 2011 and was a recipient of a National Science Foundation Career Award in 2009. Last, but hardly least, she received a North American Benthological Society President's Award in 2005. And for newer SFSers in the audience, NABS is the former name of our society now the Society for Freshwater Science. So. Much of Dr. Tullis' research relates to hydraulic and sediment dynamics, but nonetheless spans a broad range of topics and scales, including toxic cyanobacteria, fish behavior, biological and social, predicting dam removal costs, and modeling landowner behavior. She's been deeply involved in researching the removal of the Klamath River dams, including biological and social aspects, both before and after their removal. And I'm also very excited to introduce Connor Georgie, the anadromous program manager for the Spokane tribe. Connor completed his bachelor's degree in biology at Gonzaga University and has worked as an environmental consultant with Terragraphics Environmental before completing his Master of Science in Biology at Eastern Washington University in 2014. And I had the honor of serving as Connor's thesis advisor. His thesis research investigated secondary production in the White River, Washington, in areas with and without kokanee spawning. And Connor has worked on, in some way, management or conservation of many of our charismatic inland Northwest fishes. Currently, he's working in conjunction with the Upper Columbia United Tribes to bring anadromous salmon back to our region. He's been working on this project for over 10 years. This is work that requires collaboration across a plethora of federal, state, and tribal agencies. It also brings him a certain amount of local media presence, so I frequently get to see Connor's smile along with a truly ginormous fish that he's about to let go and swim away to freedom. So I'll have Connor and Desiree come on up.
Good morning. Thanks for being here this morning. Camille, thanks for the introduction, and to you and Jim for organizing this session. It's a real honor to get to be here with y'all today. And I'm super excited to share with you some of the things that we've been learning along the pathway to dam removal. And so the broader theme for this plenary is pathways to restoring fish passage at high head dams. And I get the joy of talking about dam removal, which for me and for I think a lot of folks is one of a few points of sort of positivity and almost universally positive stories around environmental restoration. So as this picture alludes to, I'm going to be spending some time talking about the Klamath, but there's been a number of other important projects that have happened both for me personally and on the sort of dam removal landscape. So I started at OSU in 2005. In 2007, I got to cut my teeth on my first dam removal project. That was the Brownsville Dam. It was a dinky little dam around 7 feet tall and like 13,000 cubic yards of gravel that the river needed downstream. So it was a really low risk project, but the regulators were really concerned. It was one of the first dam removals in Oregon, so it was subject to a whole lot of regulatory hurdles and like sort of data demands. And so despite being a pretty simple project, it ended up being a lot more complicated than it needed to be. That followed the Chiloquin Dam removal that was in the Klamath, and then the series of dams that happened on the dam removals that happened on the Rogue River. And this was really exciting to get to spend so much time in a single place and really learn the system, but also to see the whole main stem of the Rogue sort of unzipped and with big benefits for the salmon, anadromous fish in that system. I took a period of time around 10, 15 years where I kind of got bored with dam removal as a scientist, because from a sediment and hydraulics perspective, we've mostly reached sort of a saturation point. Like there's not a whole lot more interesting to learn. There was a lot of fear and concern, uncertainty initially, and now sediment moves downstream, the river kind of digests it and moves on. There's not really much surprise to be left with most dam removals. But then came the world's largest restoration project on the Klamath River, 4 dams removed over a period of mostly 1 year. And this was a really large, charismatic, and very different type of dam removal. So it was a real honor to get to work on it. And that's some of the story of how we got there is part of the story that I'll be sharing with you today. But across all of these projects, across all of this work, I've had this, dam removal has given me this really great, fortunate opportunity to spend time in and really like immersed in and on in these rivers to really get to know a place. And so that's been as a river lover, been a really great opportunity for me. But the other big opportunity that these projects have afforded me is the ability to work with this badass cohort of women, 2 of which are here today, and sort of so many amazing people that I've gotten to work with over these projects. But a lot of them are women that are really committed to doing really solid science and really under really difficult situations. And so 2 of those, Laurel Genzoli is here. She's been a major inspiration for me in a lot of ways, in terms of her commitment to rigorous science, commitment to the community. Christine Alford's here this week as well. She's just amazing all-around general person, but also just really resilient and really curious and really focused on doing good science. So it's been just a really amazing opportunity for me to get to connect with really impressive people too. And just students. Anytime you can get students out on rivers and rafts, it's always a win. So I'm going to start the talk sort of generally laying the landscape, setting the table around how we're getting to decisions about dams and dam removals at the national scale. This is something I've been working on for a while. During the COVID years, we put together a database of dam removals, and there's like 600 of them. And so this is different from the American Rivers database, which is amazing, but ours, we added a bunch of essentially elements to it, things that we wanted to know about the dams that were being removed. And so this plot illustrates 2 of the really key parts of the story of how we get to decisions about dam removals. And one thing I want to draw your attention to is that there's more red and tan colors in this plot. And those are the small dams. We are universally removing many more small dams. The vast majority of ones that we're removing are small. So while we like to talk about the Elwha and the Klamath, those are extreme end members. The distribution of dam removals are largely on that small side. The other thing that I'll draw your attention to, and we'll come back to later, is that there is a very clear geographic distribution of the dams that we're removing in the U.S., and there's an important reason for this, which we'll come back to. But we'll start with a conversation about why we're removing so many small dams. And this really is a key decision to explain how we're getting to these pathways around dam removals. And so the thing I want to draw your attention to here is that, so we've got like 1 million dams in the US, right? The National Inventory of Dams says we have 92,000, but those are just the biggest and sort of those most hazardous. But there's actually around 1 million dams in the United States. And so that's aging infrastructure. Average 70% of them are over 50, and as someone who's like seeing that year 50 approach on the horizon for me, I know it takes a lot more energy and time to kind of keep things going. And so we're on the landscape facing a lot of aging infrastructure, and we're having to make decisions. Do we repair it and maintain it, or do we remove it? And so 3 of the factors related to that are project complexity, and I'll unpack each of these. The second is around environmental regulations, which I know is no one's favorite topic, but it's actually, I think, a really important part of the story. And then trust. How do we build trust in these decision processes? Because ultimately, how we get to decisions depends on that trust part. So we'll start with complexity. And on the surface, project complexity is a little bit about size, construction complexity. Is it a dinky little dam you can remove with a hydraulic thumb over a couple of days, or it is a large-scale environmental restoration project? So on sort of the surface, that's part of the conversation. And for one of these big analyses that we did, these syntheses, was around dam removal cost. And so we put together this table to describe project complexity so we could predict cost. And you can tell this was made by engineers because there's no design elements to it. But the content, at least, is accurate. And so, as I alluded to, if your project is complex versus simple, it can be a big driver in terms of how you just get to a decision. So by construction methods, we're referring to things like, do you need a helicopter to mobilize construction equipment? Do you need a cofferdam or a temporary dam to dewater the site? So those will drive decisions around dam removal and complexity. But the other one I want to really draw your attention to here is whether the reservoir will be missed. And by this, I mean two things. So the first is like, culturally, will people miss it? I can't tell you how many people I've heard from who had like their first kiss at this dam, or they water skied on this reservoir every year for the last 30 years. And so their identity is attached to this infrastructure. And so that can actually create a whole lot of barriers in terms of litigation and in terms of just resistance from the invested parties. So that's part of whether it'll be missed, but the other part, which is also extremely important, is whether the function of that dam will be missed. So does the infrastructure need to be replaced? And that can really create a whole lot of additional complexity, which is reflected in this, again, from our database, which illustrates that the vast majority of dams that have been removed to date are hydroelectric projects. They're not power mills, they're not water supply, they're certainly not flood regulation, they're hydroelectric projects. And there's a reason for this. As you can probably imagine, hydroelectric projects are one of the few sort of functions of dams that it's really easy to replace. So I am going to use this metaphor that someone from Pacificor shared with me when I was interviewing for him for a podcast. And he told me about the Klamath Dam removals. He's like, well, imagine the power grid as a big bathtub with thousands of hoses coming into it, and they're all running full blast. And you turn one of the smallest hoses off, the rest of the sort of hoses going into the power grid can kind of make up the difference, because we're so quickly adding like solar and wind energy that the grid can kind of make up the difference. So power is a really pretty easy function of dams to replace. Water storage is not the case for that's not the case for water storage, right? When we talk about water storage for water supply, whether it's for irrigation here in the West or it's for drinking water in other places, or for flood regulation, we don't have good alternatives. This is a photo of many places in the United States where we live in flood-prone areas. 1.5 billion people, 17% of the world's population, lives in flood-prone areas. So if we're going to remove those big water storage projects, we have to somehow replace that function, which means moving people out of harm's way. I mean, we don't have good alternatives. So there are going to be dams in perpetuity that we're going to be maintaining. And a lot of those are going to be the big water storage projects. So that's one reason why we remove a lot of hydroelectric projects. The second is FERC, which is for some reason represented by this sort of authoritarian-looking icon that I don't understand. But it is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So if you operate any kind of power plant, whether it's like coal or nuclear or hydropower, you have to get a permit from FERC. And they expire every 25 to 50 years, and when you get your new FERC permit, you have to meet modern environmental regulations. And that is a really powerful carrot and stick that drives dam removal. So this gets us to our second bullet that I want to just highlight in terms of getting to dam removal decisions, everyone's favorite, environmental regulations. And for a lot of us, when we think about trying to get projects done, we think of regulations as a hindrance. And so I put together this figure to show you sort of the alphabet soup of agencies that one has to navigate for a single dam removal. And FERC is in here in the upper left, but there's a lot of other agencies that are involved both at the federal and then at the local levels. And if the community is enlightened enough, they're actually collaborating and coordinating with the tribes. But for a lot of folks, for a lot of these projects, when we think of environmental regulations, we think of things like their fragmentation, that they're all working sort of separately and not in any kind of coordinated way, that they're rigid and not relevant, not adaptable to local conditions, that they're maybe irrelevant to your project, or that they're just so obtuse that nobody understands them. And none of that is, all of that is true. And it's also true that these regulations and permitting systems can also motivate dam removal, such as the case with FERC. Another example of how regulations can drive decisions to dam removal is the National Flood Insurance Program, which, as broken as it is, can really drive in some cases, decisions to remove dams, such as the Nelson Dam, which is happened just nearby here on the tributary to the Yakima River. In its dam removal, the primary motivation was to reduce flood risk for the communities upstream. Also an environmental win from a fisheries perspective, but the primary motivation and a lot of the funding was motivated through the National Flood Insurance Program. So when we think about regulations, they can be a hindrance or a help. And on the Klamath, I'll highlight a couple of folks in particular who really created these pathways through this alphabet soup of agencies that drove a decision to get to dam removal. Then lastly, the third thing is trust, right? And I really like this image from Rosa Gonzalez of Facilitating Power, who created this sort of spectrum of community engagement. And I think for a lot of us, we're really comfortable operating in that space of the inform, where we're just like kind of what I'm doing, just one-way communication. But what I have found, both in my personal life and my work life, is that the more you can build trust, decisions move a lot faster with more trust, and people are more willing to have a seat at the table. And this played out very strongly in the Klamath. But what we see is that if you can take the time to build that trust, to get closer to the collaborate side of the scale, that things actually move better and we create wins for everyone. And to help sort of cement that idea, I want to use this quote from Chris Stein. He was the person who wrote the water quality certification for the Klamath Dam removals, which we'll come back to in a minute. But I love this quote from him because it gets at the trust question, which is that not everybody was in favor of dam removal, but the removal of the dams was the solution that solved everybody's problems. And so it took a lot of building of trust for everyone to get to the table and have their position represented in the decision. But once those conversations were happening and the trust was built, over decades, it was forged literally over decades, they could get to the decision. So that's the setup, and essentially what I'm asking you to consider with these dam removals and the decision to get to dam removal is whether it's a project, like potentially like a Lego set, right, where there's like a really clear set of directions and you're just kind of stacking pieces together, really, hopefully, usually like one outcome that makes a lot of sense. Or is it a production like an IKEA build where you're gonna need to phone a lot of friends and have a lot of cocktails for anything to kind of make a lot of sense? And so ultimately, this complexity question really drives how we get to dam removal or to maintaining this infrastructure. So is it a Brownsville dam, a small dam that's really simple from a construction and a community engagement perspective, or is it a Klamath that takes 30 years to build the trust and to build the capacity to make it happen? So that gets us to the Klamath, this sort of beacon of hope in this sort of somewhat dark world right now. I really like this image, this aerial image of the Klamath, because it highlights a lot of the things that were happening. This is one of the dams that was removed, but you can see before dam removal, the cyanobacteria blooms. You can see an ineffective fish ladder. You can see water getting pushed off to a hydroelectric plant and the river downstream getting dewatered. All of these other things that happened that were benefits essentially associated with removing the projects. This is the Klamath Basin. It's, Oregon south of us. It's at the southern Oregon border where it meets California. And the upper part of the basin, it's a really unique watershed. People refer to it as the upside down river. The upper basin is really flat. It was a large wetland like the size of the Everglades before it was converted largely to irrigated agriculture. But it's a hot, flat, dry place. And then as you get down into California, it gets into more of a canyony reach with high drainage density, big tributaries coming in, great for whitewater rafting. And right at the middle where these two geologies intersect was a really great place to build dams. So these dams electrified a really rural area. It was around 50,000 homes that were powered by this roughly 170 megawatts of power. So these are the 4 dams. They're all gone. You can see Iron Gate there in the top left corner was the largest. It was also the farthest downstream, around 170 feet. Copco was 132 feet, is the second highest. So these are not small projects. These were large dams with a large footprint and a large impact on the ecosystem. And the decision to get to removal on the Klamath was largely driven by the fact that they were hydroelectric projects, and so therefore they were required to get a FERC permit. And this happened over decades also where their permit expired and they weren't meeting water quality standards and things still weren't happening. But ultimately, that is what drove the decision that they had to, as part of their FERC relicensing process, meet fish passage requirements, which ultimately cost a lot of money. And Pacificor and Berkshire Hathaway was able to find a pathway to get taxpayers and ratepayers to pay for this project rather than their shareholders. And so ultimately, it was a financial decision for them to get to dam removal, to reach a dam removal decision. But there were enormous other benefits associated with it. So those dams contributed to, they were full of toxic cyanobacteria. They contributed to fish disease risk. This is a juvenile salmon that's infected with a pathogen. Up to 90% of them were infected in years. And they impacted water quality significantly enough that there were regular fish kills downstream. So on the other hand, on the more positive side, these benefits of dam removal are pretty profound in terms of access to over 400 miles of fish habitat, reduction of fish disease risk, the water quality sides of things, which is what the technical side of what my team focused on, and then restoration of people, which is a really important part of this story. So there was this date, November 17th, 2022, where it's one of those, for me, and you have those moments in your life where you'll never forget where you were, like for me, like 9/11 or when Barack Obama got elected. This was another one of those moments where I'm sitting in my office, FERC is about to vote on whether to approve the surrender order to transfer the dam, essentially to permit dam removal, and you're just refreshing, like hoping, like when's it gonna happen? And then it happens. And it feels like this cumulative moment, but it actually took a lot to get to this piece, to this moment in time. And we like to build timelines to explain how things happen, and this is one of those. If we go back, we can start this timeline around 2002, where there was a really massive fish kill on the river. It really mobilized the tribes in particular at that point. They showed up in Edinburgh protesting at the Pacific Coast stakeholder meeting. And then there were a series of agreements, trust built, trust lost, over a series of 15 years to get to this point in 2024 where the dams were removed. So this is a really neat and tidy version of what happened, but there's two key things that this timeline is missing that I want to draw your attention to. The first is decades of indigenous resistance. And I want to be really clear that this is not my story to tell, but I want to at least share with you some highlights of it, encourage you to read and learn more about it, because it is such a compelling and important part of what happened in the river, in the basin, and is happening in other systems as well. So this is a really good book to check out, The Water Remembers by Amy Bowers-Cordalis. It's on Spotify. She's reading it, and her family are like singing in it. So if you want to listen to it, it's a really good way to hear their stories. On a high level, what happened are some things that were sort of very important, but public-facing activism, like social protests, things that we might recognize that we might do, like shown up at protests. They did the salmon run, where they'd literally run from the headwaters, from the mouth of the river upriver, carrying these signs of salmon. But there were other things that were really important and sort of are less well documented or less well known. For example, in particular, this case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. This was Ray Matz was a Yurok tribal fisherman who was arrested 14 or 15 times for failing to comply with restriction on fishing. So the commercial fishing was open, but the tribal fishing was closed, and Matt and his family continued to resist, continued essentially refusing to walk away when things were really bleak. And so this is just one example. And so we sued the government. They went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court reaffirmed what already existed, which were their rights to the fish and to the river. So this is just one example of some of those efforts, I guess, that were more latent. Is this just a refusal to walk away from the river when they were kind of being pushed out. Another is a pretty dark moment in the history of the Klamath, which were the salmon wars back in the late 70s. And so for this, I want to put a few words from Diane Bowers, who's a Yurok tribal member, and give you the opportunity to read them so you can hear them sort of in your own voice rather than hearing mine, because these are obviously not my words. For me, every time I read those words, it reminds me of what the tribes have had to do to protect their lives and livelihoods in ways that's hard for a lot of us to kind of recognize in our own lives. And so I think it's really great to tell the story of what happened in the Klamath because it is such a positive, we've had such positive outcomes, but for many decades, the the path to getting there was pretty dark. On a lighter note, though, the tribes have also played this critical role in the science of the basin. This is a screenshot from the Karuk tribe's water quality database. They've been out there monitoring water quality in fisheries, essentially doing the science. The Klamath is one of the most monitored river systems I've ever worked in, and the tribes have been key leaders in this effort. And so their role in contributing to Western science and indigenous knowledge about the river was critical to getting to the dam removal. And then finally, I'm going to come back to environmental permitting because I alluded to there is a reason in that we have this shape in terms of the distribution of dam removals. Why does Ohio, for example, have so many more dam removals than, say, Tennessee? And the reason is because there's individual champions within these permitting agencies that are able to navigate this alphabet soup of agencies. So I'm going to focus for just a couple of slides at the state level. And on the Klamath, the pre-dam removal sort of stage was driven in part by Clayton Krieger. And he and I started working together in like 2007, 2008 on a Mercury TM deal. And at the time, I could even tell that this man had like bigger vision, understood like time and space and sort of bigger scale water quality issues throughout the basin in ways that I didn't. And that role, he worked for the Water Quality Control Board in California. And the role of that agency was to document the dams as contributors to the basin scale water quality issues, and then to set the standards that documented those impacts. So then when the FERC licensing process came up, those documents, that understanding, those regulations were already in place. So really positioning those dams as in their role in terms of contributing to the decline of water quality. The second occurred during dam removal, and Chris Stein, again from DEQ, this is not a picture of him, but Chris Stein played a key role, and this happened through the Section 401 water quality certification, essentially the water quality permit, which is, otherwise a boring story to tell, except that something really profound happened here. And what happened was that Chris took a major leadership role in terms of balancing short-term exceedances in water quality standards for long-term wins, for that long-term gain. And so this is a direct quote from that water quality permit that ODEQ, our Department of Environmental Quality, finds the proposed activity will cause temporary lowering of water quality, but will improve water quality and result in net ecological benefit. And to get to that point, Chris had to literally go to the state legislature, and revise the rules, the water quality standards at the state level. And this set in a really important precedence for ecological restoration across the state, to be able to do a little bit of sort of short-term exceedances for big long-term gains. And so this has rippling effects across the state for environmental restoration in a positive way. And it wasn't that they totally stripped off environmental regulations. There were conditions like schedule and like how they did the drawdown, like when it happened, so that those impacts were, for example, in the winter when the fish weren't in the river. So that gets us to sort of my conclusions here, and how we saw fish recovering in the river. So Iron Gate Dam, the lowest dam, was breached on October 2nd. And October 4th, that blip that you see, the light color between 2 and 4, was the first salmon showing up in sonar 2 days after that dam had been breached. So within 2 days, they were already navigating through the dam site for the first time in 100 years. This is a video. So, and you look at the media, people are like, hey, there's salmon everywhere, but that happened fast. This is a video from my colleague, Julie Alexander, taken in November, so a month after dam removal. And these Chinook fall Chinook are in the system spawning in these tributaries to the reservoirs within a month. Those fish have already completed one life cycle. They're juvenile leaving the system actually now at this point. Let's see, video. Okay, so this is for the next, so there's 4 dams that removed, there are 2 more still upstream. This is the first fish navigating a fishway that wasn't intended for their passage, but they're already making their way through sort of navigating additional hurdles to get back upstream. And now those juveniles are spawning, we have wild recruitment happening in the tributaries even upper Klamath Lake. So again, a quote from Chris Stein, the power of the river to be restored should never be underestimated. I think a lot of us from the science side sort of hedged our projections a bit, but the river has really exceeded our expectations in terms of how quickly it can recover. So as we make decisions about dams, whether to keep them or remove them, we got to be able to address that complexity and think about especially individuals and their champions within regulatory positions, building trust through these processes. And then a couple of things that I think are also important. The tribes have really demonstrated this commitment, this unfaltering commitment to what you believe in and seeing it happen. And then the legal and political strategies, which are definitely not for me, but I've learned to partner with people for whom that is a skill, because those are really important parts to getting to decisions. So with that, I will close with a comment that, where we started is using hydroelectric projects as an example of the pathway, but there are going to be dams that we have to maintain in perpetuity. And a lot of those, for example, are flood regulation projects or these high-head dams that are serving critical roles for society that we don't have replacement functions for. And so that's where Connor's work really starts to highlight some of the alternative strategies that exist. And I want to just make some quick plugs for others. If you're interested in the Klamath, some things that are that are happening, exciting sessions this week. So today and 2 in the afternoon, there's one on Laurel Genzolo will be talking about some impacts of sediment on stream metabolism in the Klamath. She's an amazing speaker. Definitely encourage you to check that out. Christine's also here giving a talk about the impacts of the sediment pulse of, many millions of cubic yards of material that moved downstream that impacted dissolved oxygen in the river. Also a really good speaker. And then tomorrow, for a big chunk of the day, there's a session on Indigenous leadership and collaboration. And John Oberholzer-Dent from the Karuk tribe will be part of that session. So a bunch of things about Klamath related if you want to hear more. And then I'll leave you with this picture. I'm an engineer. We study a lot of stuff around sediment, but also its impact on the environment. But this video is some work we were doing to try to understand mobilization of sediment in the reservoirs. But for me, it also, as Iron Gate was dewatering, so you can kind of see the river come back to life, sort of being restored in a very short matter of time. So with that, we'll just really do a quick handoff to Connor, I think, and then we'll take questions afterwards. Thank you so much.
Great job, Desiree. Good morning, everybody. My name's Connor Georgie. Again, Camille, thank you for the kind introduction. I'm with the Spokane Tribe of Indians. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the work that we've been doing here in the Upper Columbia River. And when I say we, who I'm really talking about are our partners, not just at the Spokane Tribe, but the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, the Colville Tribe, and the Upper Columbia United Tribes, or what we call UCUT. UCUT is a consortium of 5 tribes in the Upper Columbia, and really they are kind of an organizing body or an umbrella under which a lot of this work is being performed. I really enjoy the theme of this conference, gathering to build resilient watersheds in communities, in part because the tribes have been doing this just downstream of here for millennia. Just downstream of here is a place from where we sit today, a place known as the Gathering Place. For millennia, the Spokane Tribe and other regional tribes from as far away as Montana would gather here in late summer, early fall, and gather. They'd trade, they'd celebrate, they'd marry, they'd game, and all of this joy was centered around the harvest of salmon, primarily down at Spokane Falls. These fish were a gift from the Creator. They were a central part of nutritional subsistence, a cultural and spiritual touchstone. There are a number of iconic fishing sites in the Upper Columbia. Historically, millions of Chinook and sockeye would return to the Upper Columbia River Basin. Now, to orient you, we are in Spokane, Washington, which is located in the bottom right corner of that red box up on the screen. Both the Spokane River and the Columbia River flow through the northeast corner of Washington State, and those rivers and their tributaries supported millions of fish. And there were tribal fishing sites similar to the Gathering Place scattered all throughout this region. from as far south as Hangman Creek, down in the Hangman Creek watershed, all the way up north towards the Canadian border around Kettle Falls. Major, iconic fishing site. So what happened? Well, early 20th century, late 1800s, salmon populations in the Columbia River Basin were already struggling. In part due to habitat degradation throughout the area, and also in part due to overharvest of fish in the lower Columbia River. But here in our area, the nail in the coffin was really hydroelectric dam removal. Come on. Let's back up and see if that does something. There we go, thank you. First was a 9-mile dam on the Spokane River in 1908. This is constructed on the main stem Spokane. It was built without fish passage. It was used to power an electric railroad, and it barred fish from the main stem Spokane River as well as Hangman Creek. And then Little Falls Dam came shortly after that. Little Falls actually had fish passage, upstream fish passage. It was a wooden type flume that its effectiveness wasn't entirely clear, and it didn't really matter because after a few years, Long Lake Dam was constructed just upstream of Little Falls Dam on the Spokane without fish passage, and for a brief period of time, it was the largest dam in the world. Later in the 1900s, 1941, Grand Coulee Dam was constructed, completed at about river mile 600 on the Columbia River. It did not have fish passage as well, and this really started to create what we call locally the blocked area of the Upper Columbia. The Upper Columbia blocked area expanded in 1955 when the construction of Chief Joseph Dam was completed, and this is important context because Grand Coulee was constructed at river mile 600. The Columbia River is about 1,200 miles long. And so having these projects installed without fish passage not only barred those fish from Upper Columbia tribes here in the United States, but all the communities all the way up to the headwaters. Communities, indigenous nations, not just to the headwaters, but even down all the way to the mouth, because we lost the production of those fish from the blocked area. Well, that was then, and where are we now? We are in year 3 of what has been called the most audacious fish passage and reintroduction project attempted. And we are able to do this because of and with our federal partners. We have local salmon rearing programs, active behavior and survival studies of fish at multiple life stages. We're currently designing upstream fish passage facilities at Chief Joseph Dam. We are making a lot of progress, and a lot of that is done through and because of a settlement agreement reached between the federal government and the tribes back in late 2023. Through this mediated agreement, funding is being provided by a suite of agencies to support these projects over the 20-year expected lifespan of our reintroduction program, what we call the Phase 2 Implementation Plan, or the P2IP. Commitments have been made by the federal government and the tribes to see the program through while simultaneously maintaining the benefits that the hydro system provides to the broader region. And more importantly, those commitments have been kept by all parties of the agreement. And if I'm reading the room right, a lot of y'all would be really interested in all the technical aspects and the research that we're doing and what we're finding. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk about that today. And I don't know if there's any talks queued up later in the session to cover that content. What I'm going to talk about, what I think is really interesting, is how we got to where we are today and how we're able to keep going and keep making progress on this fish passage and reintroduction plan. Well, why do I think this is interesting? Well, I think it's interesting because Grand Coulee and Chief Joseph Dams together produce about 40% of the hydroelectric power in the Columbia River Basin. Water diverted from Lake Roosevelt irrigates about 700,000 acres of land within the Columbia Basin Project to support agriculture. Lake Roosevelt is a storage reservoir. Lake Roosevelt, behind Grand Coulee, 150 miles long, it captures the spring freshet coming out of Canada to protect downstream communities from flooding, which has happened in the past. These dams are critical pieces of infrastructure that are foundational to regional communities and economies. Elsewhere in the Columbia Basin, mitigation for fish and wildlife has required changes to how rivers and dams are operated, rebalancing economic fish and wildlife benefits. So fish passage and reintroduction here, it freaked a lot of people out, especially early on in our efforts. So how did we get the agencies, user groups, and others to support this reintroduction effort? And if not support it, maybe not oppose it? Well, early on in the reintroduction effort, there was a lot of resistance to fish passage and reintroduction to the Upper Columbia. Some of this was merely dismissive. We heard things like, those impacts have already been mitigated, or reintroduction is not physically possible over a dam that big. You don't have any habitat. Don't you have pike up there? Over time, as momentum grew, we saw that resistance devolve into obstructionism. This is my opinion. There were campaigns against our reintroduction program, prohibitive policies, backroom analyses, and even yelling at professional meetings. Like, it got weird and really uncomfortable at times. From my perspective, I think that this resistance has a couple of root causes or root sources that we're going to kind of walk through. One was skepticism, a sincere belief that fish passage reintroduction up here really wasn't possible, that the dam was too big and that we didn't have the habitat, and there wasn't a clear understanding of how we would do it or why we would even do it. I think there was a lot of mistrust across the region, mistrust about, okay, what are the tribes doing, and what is this going to end up doing to our hydro system? And that led, I think, to a lot of fear about the consequences to the hydro system, and a lot of fear associated with the costs. How much is this program going to cost the region? So there was a lot of uncertainty. How did we get past these really challenging issues? Despite Gary Larson making light of these are major problems, and we're talking about people's lives and economies. So what did we do? We demonstrated. We demonstrated the feasibility of our reintroduction effort. We demonstrated the credibility by showing that we have a sound plan in place. And we also demonstrated success, proofs of concepts that we tried. We were transparent. We communicated until it hurt. We communicated with any and everybody who would listen to us, and then that's a two-way street. We would also listen to them. We needed to hear what their perspective was, what their concerns were. Participation was a critical piece to show people why we should pursue fish passage and reintroduction up here. And over the course of these conversations and providing that transparency, a lot of trust was starting to be built between the tribes, the agencies, and even individuals working on these efforts on both sides. And then ultimately, to alleviate a lot of the fear, we had to come up with solid commitments that were legally founded, that were codified, and could be carried forward. All right, we're going to walk through each of those in a little bit more detail, a little more specific history. Going back to the credibility, having a plan. The tribes never stopped wanting fish or salmon back up into their waters. In some cases, have been over a century since they'd had salmon back, and so it makes sense that the tribes, not just Columbia Basin tribes, but also indigenous nations up in Canada, took the initiative to come up with the first approach to provide fish passage and reintroduction to the Upper Columbia River. In 2015, in preparation for the Columbia River Treaty renegotiations, Columbia Basin tribes and indigenous nations came up with an internationally based 4-phased approach to fish passage and reintroduction, addressing Columbia River main stem dams. In 2014, the Northwest Power and Conservation Council adopted a version of that plan within their Fish and Wildlife program. This plan was a domestic version. It addressed the United States only because the Fish and Wildlife Program is a document that guides and directs fish and wildlife mitigation associated with the hydropower system in the U.S. portion of the Columbia River Basin. Now that we had a plan in place, we had an approach, we were able to make progress and start to move forward. And so the tribes and the council, Northwest Power and Conservation Council, started chipping away at phase 1 of that approach. We performed a lot of different technical studies of different aspects. We covered reintroduction risk and donor stock assessment. The preferred donor stocks were Upper Columbia summer Chinook and sockeye. We found that the pathogen and predation risks were manageable, that there was a lot of habitat up here in the blocked area in just the U.S. portion, over 1,000 miles of potential tributary habitats. The Northwest Power and Conservation Council staff did a review of fish passage at high head dams and found that the technology does exist. And life cycle modeling that the UCUT tribes performed showed that salmon production and survival was promising under different management scenarios and different assumptions. And so having this initial feasibility work done was fantastic. We shared this with the region to help, again, provide transparency, show people the opportunity that was available here in the Upper Columbia, but to give it a little bit more credibility, we submitted it to the council and had the Independent Scientific Advisory Board provide a review of our phase 1 report. All the different components tied together, showing what the big picture could and should look like. And the ISAB provided a really helpful review. There was fair critiques, but also some really good guidance about what we should do for phase 2. Hearing that feedback from the ISAB, the tribes were moving forward into phase 2. They came up with a plan, the P2IP, phase 2 implementation plan. This is a stepwise and scientifically adaptive approach to evaluate and test the feasibility of restoring salmon to our region. In a nutshell, this 21-year plan is broken down into 2 steps. Step 1 includes the development of local fish production facilities so that we actually have fish to study. Also in step 1, those first 6 years, we're performing behavior and survival studies on those fish that we're producing, figuring out where some of the bottlenecks are, what passage survival is like, and really importantly, how are those fish behaving when they approach those dams, both going downstream and coming upstream. And we're going to use that information to help design these fish passage facilities. Step 2 is the sequenced installation of fish passage facilities at all 5 dams, if needed. If salmon survival is high enough at one project, for instance, 9 Mile Dam, it is not a very large dam, and a lot of water goes over spill during that spring out-migration season. And so we don't expect survival to be tremendously high, or mortality to be tremendously high. We expect survival to be pretty good. And so we may not need fish passage facilities at each and every dam, depending on the scenarios playing out. All right. We did feasibility, we've got a good plan in place, and now in about 2021, we started to share that draft plan with the region. We went out and met with any and everybody who would possibly listen to us. We gave over 60 presentations. We not just shared, we also heard what the concerns were, what the issues were, and talked through some of the solutions and incorporated that into the next version of the P2IP. And once we got the P2IP in a state where we felt really good about it, we took it back to the ISAB, this independent group of scientists, to review it for us, to make sure that we are on the right track. And again, the ISAB provided a really fair critique of our plan and provided some really helpful guidance. The P2IP and the ISAB review, the final drafts were published in mid to late 2022. But Early on, during all this technical work, the phased approach, the tribes recognized that it is going to be decades to see that phased approach through, to start to see fish passage and to see fish in the rivers. But the tribes didn't want to wait that long. And so we started performing cultural and educational releases of both juveniles and adults to the blocked area starting in about 2017. Doing these releases was really incredible, really moving to see fish back in these waters, reconnecting not just the fish with the watersheds, but the people with the fish, rekindling some of those old traditions that had long been dormant. It also provided us researchers with an opportunity to make some initial observations about how fish would behave once they're back in our waters, because we hadn't seen salmon in the Spokane for many decades, salmon in the Columbia for many decades. We didn't know how those fish were going to respond, and so we took this as an opportunity to not test, but at least make some observations about some of the concepts that we included in the P2IP. And what we saw really surprised us. It surprised a lot of people. Early on, the Spokane and the Coeur d'Alene tribes both started performing juvenile releases of pit-tagged yearling summer Chinook to reservation waters. In 2019, one of these fish returned to the basin, in Uts Chinetque, she who retraces her steps. She was the first one to come back. We watched her via Patagus, an online pit tag tracking system, as she worked her way up the Columbia system and ultimately found her way into the Chief Joseph hatchery that is at the base of Chief Joseph Dam, that is operated by the Colville tribe. Policy constraints prevented her transfer to us alive, but we were able to receive her body. We had her hide preserved and her flesh returned to the river to call her siblings home. The next year, 3 of her siblings came back to the basin. None of those fish made it up into the Chief Joseph hatchery. But one of those fish, we know, was harvested in the lower river because we got a phone call from Wendy, Nez Perce fish processor down in Rufus, Oregon, who got our phone number off the back of a fish. Yes, we had a Floy tag implanted next to the dorsal fin that had our phone number on it. And amazingly, she called us. We told her the story of this fish, and she graciously returned it to the tribe. So those fish were coming back 2019, 2020. That was in parallel to the phase 1 report coming out, and as we were starting to draft the P2IP. In 2022, the Coeur d'Alene tribe had a fish come back. She who repeatedly dives. This fish was released on the Coeur d'Alene Reservation in Idaho to Hangman Creek. Those fish that were released had to contend with Hangman Creek itself, 3 dams on the Spokane River, 120 clicks of storage reservoir that is Lake Roosevelt, then go through Grant Coulee and Chief Joe before they hit the rest of the main stem Columbia River and work their way through 9 more dams. These fish gave the region, the tribes, so much hope and optimism about what was possible. We were able to look at some of the concepts that we'd included. We found that survival under current conditions and high-row operations was possible, that the Chief Joseph ladder can collect adults, and that harvest is going to happen downstream and likely out in the ocean, and it's going to provide benefits that are broader than just the Upper Columbia, but applicable to the basin and beyond. And importantly, it's going to provide a lot of tribal healing. Once these stories came out and the people began to be aware of the opportunity that lay in front of us and that we had a sound plan in place that had been reviewed, we had the credibility, we demonstrated some successes, we started to really get some support. And we couldn't have done those cultural and educational releases without some partners. Douglas PUD, Public Utility District, the Wells Dam, and their fish hatchery, they were able to provide us access to live adult Chinook. That was huge early on. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was able to provide us with eyed eggs so we can start to grow some of the fish ourselves and start to perform some of these releases. The evidence was huge, in order to demonstrate what was possible. And when the region saw what was possible, we started getting more financial support. The state of Washington, the Department of Fish and Wildlife provided rearing opportunities in local facilities. USGS was able to provide technical support and some internal funds to actually do some of the structured research that we described in the P2IP. And we started moving. We were busy. We were making things happen, and we wanted everybody else to know what was happening up here. We shared what was going on in the Upper Columbia with the region as much as possible. But the P2IP had a price tag of hundreds of millions of dollars. And even though we were starting to get some financial support and really make some progress on this, we needed a firm, hard, long-term commitment to make this actually happen. And what seemed to be missing was that people didn't understand why fish passage and reintroduction. And I can't tell you why we should do this. It is something that you have to feel. You have to get your hands on that fish and release it back into waters that have been missing anadromous fish for decades. And so we invited elected leaders at the federal level, the state level, agency reps, utilities to come out and actually participate in a fish release so they can better understand what this is all about and why this is worth pursuing. We got their participation, and we also participated in other regional processes. We started sharing our work, sharing our plan, sharing the success that we had in concurrent policy processes to get the P2IP incorporated into different management recommendations of various guiding documents. However, the Columbia River System Operations Environmental Impact Statement that came out in 2020 did not include blocked area reintroduction. That was early on in our reintroduction effort, but the tribes pushed the federal agencies really hard to consider fish passage and reintroduction of the Upper Columbia into this really fundamental document. But the agencies refused. They were not able to do that. And one very astute individual at the Bureau of Reclamation made the observation that the tribes and the agencies were just talking past each other. They weren't speaking the same language. They weren't getting it. What they really needed to happen was to sit down and have really constructive conversations with one another. So in about 2021, the Bureau of Reclamation, under the first Trump administration, established the Upper Columbia Blocked Areas Anadromous Fish Working Group. Somebody wanted a really good acronym, and that's the title they came up with. This was a really important, really fundamental aspect of starting to get a bit more momentum, to quit talking past one another. This was a structured and facilitated forum that had different tiers of communication from a technical level, policy level, legal, and leadership, both the agencies and the tribes. The federal agencies that were participating were the Bureau of Reclamation, the Bonneville Power Administration, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine and Fisheries Service, and the state of Washington was involved, as well as the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, the Spokane Tribe, and the Colville Tribe. And it was here that we were really able to drill down into some of the details about what the P2IP is, what we were proposing. We heard what the concerns were, and we're able to start to come up with some solutions. And more importantly, I think, in this forum, we were able to start building relationships with some of the agencies and the individuals within the agencies. Building those relationships and that trust is huge. The ability to have a conversation the ability to have an open, transparent, and honest conversation is incredibly valuable. And if anybody's in a relationship, I'm sure you can probably relate to that. What ultimately happened was that the Coeur d'Alene, the Spokane, and the Colville tribes intervened in ongoing litigation, the National Wildlife Federation and the National Marine Fisheries Service. The conversations that were happening in the UC BAF evolved and got into a bit more detail. really coming up with the solutions, wording the solutions with excruciating detail, codifying it so that everybody, both sides, had the assurances that they needed that they could proceed with the P2IP, fund the P2IP, and engage in the P2IP over the course of its projected lifespan. Some of those commitments were to not use ESA-listed stocks within our reintroduction effort. There would not be material changes to the dams or their operations. The tribes would get access to fish and facilities. The federal government would actively participate in our reintroduction effort. We meet with them at least twice a week, many times a month, coordinating all of the different aspects of the work that is going on the ground right now. And really importantly is the funding piece. We have long-term funding committed over 20 years as part of this in order to continue and maintain this program and see this through. And of course, the structured communication. This is kind of a legacy from the UC BAFWIG in that there's different tiers of communication that carried through. And I think that that is really important. So the next time that you are roped into a facilitated meeting, take notes about the structure of it, how the conversations progress, the interactions, because those are extremely applicable and could be carried through in other aspects of the work as it continues to evolve. So if you were going to ask me today, how do you maintain progress? How do you keep this going with all the different projects going on? Well, really, we've been operating the P2IP the same way the Upper Columbia tribes have operated for millennia. We gather our partners from near and far, we share, and we find ways to work together instead of against one another. Thank you. I don't know why I'm still up here. I think we might be taking some Q&A, Desiree and I, unless we're out of time.
Yeah, if you and Desiree want to take some questions, please. So if people have questions, I can bring the mic over.
Yeah, so questions are welcome, and we can bring a mic to you.
Thank you, Jen.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, y'all, for your talks. Really, really interesting. Such huge challenges. Oh, I'm over here. Oh, like in the front. Yeah, yeah, oh, over here, yeah. But you don't have to look at me. So I wanted to ask, in these political times, are there any surprise, sort of unique opportunities with the way the administration, just the frame now that will really help or really hinder sort of these large-scale, coordinated, multi-agency projects? What do you see sort of forecasting in your crystal ball for the next, 5 years?
If you've got something, go for it.
I think from my experience, what's happening the greatest opportunities right now are really happening at a more local scale. And so NGOs that are, leading the efforts, the state regulation, the state regulator offices, there is so much happening and so many good things happening, but they're not on the national scale. And so I see a ton of positive grassroots kinds of efforts happening. And it's probably because the federal government, we're filling in these gaps that are happening at the federal government, but that work is happening. And it's through a lot of that unfaltering commitment and the grind. But people are, there's so many dam removals happening this year, there's so many restoration projects happening, and it's through those really local grassroots efforts. Thanks.
I wouldn't say that there's necessarily new or unique opportunities. I think the opportunities are always out there. I think the take-home message is don't be afraid to have a conversation, engage with people, share your ideas, share what you're thinking, and also be responsive. Listen, hear what the concerns are, and be creative in figuring out solutions to address those concerns.
Hi, thank you for this. It's so thought-provoking and provides such a rich context, I think, for all of us to understand that interaction between community science and natural resources management. And you probably stated this, but just together, I wonder if you could say, why now? Why is it happening now, at this point in history?
That's a really good question. I think there was kind of a series of events that just aligned to make now an opportune time, and that goes back to the Columbia River Treaty and kind of the renegotiation between the US and Canada on how the Columbia River is operated and managed. Tribes and indigenous nations long wanted, instead of just kind of two legs of the stool, a three-legged stool to include ecosystem function into the treaty. And so that propelled kind of the planning for fish passage and reintroduction. And then it just started to gain momentum, and we started to be able to incorporate it into other policy processes once we had kind of a rough framework in place. And so I think kind of a confluence of policy processes enabled the now.
From the dam removal perspective, it's a lot about aging infrastructure. I know we all like to think of it as environmental restoration, but a lot of these projects are triggered by aging infrastructure. And there's no dam safety program really in the United States, so we're selling a lot of these, unloading public safety liabilities onto like restoration projects, and so we're achieving these win-wins, but a lot of these projects start off as just this old crumbling piece of infrastructure, and then we can get restoration dollars and like create these significant win-wins, but a lot of it's driven by the fact that our dams are old.
I'm new. I don't know if you covered this, but I wanted to ask the question, how will you study this reintroduction in the long run? Like, these fish are a keystone species, so how are you going to study the long-term effects of this on the ecosystem? Because it has changed so much, like, the settlement here has changed the environment so much. And I want to know what sort of things we could study from this about the importance of keystone species and the environment and human impact.
That's a really good question. Monitoring the broad ecosystem response and benefits to our reintroduction effort isn't something that we thought about. I'm sure there's a lot of professors in the room who have some ideas on how we might go about that. The P2IP is really very specific on focusing on the fish and coming up with those fish passage facilities and seeing how individual populations and groups of fish respond to those improvements. Ecosystem benefits for a broader reintroduction effort. I'm sure that there are a lot of people in here who have wheels turning about how they may be able to and could potentially do that. It's a great question.
Hi. That was really effective storytelling. And as scientists, we like to communicate with data, of course. And so this is a personal question. When did you realize the power of firsts and photographs, the N equals 1, to tell your story?
That's a really good question, too. And what I will say, there have been a couple of times, moments in my career for me where I realized I was giving a talk about science and that, like, you could see the curtains close. Even though, and I love rivers, I love the physics and the ecology, but I wasn't reaching people, especially the public and policymakers. And so it was essentially, the way most of us learn, you make mistakes, and then you start to really think of, so the Voices for Science program within the American Geophysical Union started to help me figure out how to develop my storytelling voice. I've worked with graphic designers, with visual storytellers, people who have skills in this. So for me, I find that I still give science talks, but I spend a lot more time on figures. I spend a lot more time thinking about how to tell the arc rather than just here are a bunch of data and here are my findings, because ultimately as a scientist, I care a lot about connecting with the public and policymakers because I want to make it relevant to them and the things that they care about. But the initiative was really kind of blundering a couple of times early on and thinking, I've got to do better than this because I don't want to be that sort of pointy head academic who doesn't do anything that people can connect with.
Okay, we're going to take one more question.
I think for me, one key moment was the very first adult Chinook salmon release that the Colville tribes performed down in Rufus Woods. There was a prayer right beforehand and a song. And because of the location, there was this massive cliff on the opposite side of the river. And the individual's voice reverberated off the back of that cliff and back at you. And I'm getting goosebumps right now just thinking about and remembering that and feeling how powerful that was and trying to figure out how to convey that message and that experience to a broader audience, because if they could feel it, then they could start to better understand it. I did not have the benefit of working with graphic designers and other people. I just like to read a lot of Stephen King.
Okay, we do have one more question.
Hey, kulamosay hutch, ndalawansi Vic Secondine, Nitalanape. Hi, I'm Vic Secondine. I'm from the Delaware Tribe of Indians, and I was wondering, you did mention that like the financial aspect was a huge barrier, and that's something that my tribe experiences as very large barriers on the financial front, and then also just being far removed from our homelands. So I was wondering if you could share like maybe like some ways of being able to overcome those boundaries, like how these tribes were able to like get, yeah, I guess more information about making these things possible for the underrepresented voices, and especially like with how my tribe is so far removed from our homelands, and it's just very hard to get our people out there in the East. And yeah, I would like maybe some brainstorming.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question and a really big challenge that we had to deal with up here. I mentioned finding early partners, organizations, groups, people. It comes down to individuals that are able to provide just a minute amount of support that you can then build on. So for us, it was getting adult fish or eggs and just barely scraping by with what we had, with whatever resources we could hobble together to get those first observations and then share those observations. And then that created a lot of momentum for us to start to bring in additional support. It kind of goes back to the question over here about how we tell a story and share this information. You are kind of starting to build a narrative and starting to build on these little tiny successes towards a bigger program. At least that was our experience. I hope that's helpful.
Winishi.
Wow. So next, I'm pleased to introduce Commissioner Dave Upthegrove. He is the State of Washington Commissioner of Public Lands, where he leads the Department of Natural Resources, which stewards 5.6 million acres of public lands, forest, and water. Commissioner Upthegrove earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Environmental Consulting from the University of Colorado Boulder, and has a graduate certificate in energy policy planning from the University of Idaho. He has a long history of public service. Commissioner Upthegrove served in the Washington House of Representatives from 2002 to 2013, where he chaired the Environment Committee. He was then a member of the Kings County Council, representing the 5th District of Seattle metro area from 2014 to 2025. As Commissioner of Public Lands, he has initiated the largest forest conservation action in Washington in a generation. Please help me welcome Commissioner Upthegrove.
Well, good morning. Lord knows if I'm a good commissioner or not, but I have this cool last name, Upthegrove, so I'm under no illusions why people vote for me. Here, you know, one morning last spring, I stood on the banks of the Pilchuck River up north of Seattle, and I looked up, and a helicopter hovered above me with 4 massive trees dangling beneath it. And as I watched, the helicopter lowered those trees into the river and released them, creating a log jam in the middle of the river. And the results were almost immediate. Within hours, juvenile coho began gathering in the swells created by the logs. Within merely hours, birds and insects began hovering around the roots of the trees. Within hours, the river remembered. That project, a partnership between our State Department of Natural Resources and the Tulalip tribes, was part of a larger effort to restore salmon habitat and repair some of the ecological damage caused by a century of dams, barriers, and development. But what struck me most standing there that morning was this. The science behind the project was not theoretical. The technology was not experimental. The need was not unclear. We knew what to do, we had the expertise to do it, and when we acted, the ecosystem responded almost immediately. And I think about that moment a lot these days because we're living through a strange contradiction. We're learning more and more about freshwater systems, watershed function, salmon recovery, climate resilience, floodplain restoration, ecosystem connectivity, and yet, despite all that knowledge, ecological decline continues to accelerate in many places. Not because we lack science, but because implementation is hard, because long-term thinking is hard, because collaboration is hard, because institutions move slowly, because public trust is fragile, because climate change is accelerating faster than our systems were designed to respond to, and because the gap between knowing and doing remains enormous. So that's one of the reasons I'm excited to be with you today, not simply to describe the work of one state agency, and certainly not because this audience needs a lecture on the importance of freshwater ecosystems. You know that work way better than I do. I wanted to talk with you because many of you are generating the science that will determine whether entire watersheds, species, and communities will be viable and remain viable for the decades ahead. And, importantly, because the next challenge is not merely scientific. It is civic, institutional, cultural, political. The question before us now is not, do we understand the problem? The question is, can we build enough public trust, enough durable partnerships, and strong enough democratic and civic institutions to act at the scale and speed that this moment requires? And that's the challenge I wrestle with every day as Washington's Commissioner of Public Lands. At Washington's DNR, we manage forests, aquatic lands, wildfire response, recreation lands, habitat restoration, working lands, and so much more. And what I've learned very quickly in this role is that every environmental issue eventually becomes a human issue. Floodplains are about habitat, but they're also about homes and insurance rates and local economies. Forest health is about ecology, but also about mills, rural economies, and public safety. Salmon recovery is about species restoration, but also treaty rights, culture, identity, and the future of entire communities. Nothing exists in isolation. And frankly, one of the hardest parts of this work is that everyone usually wants the same thing, right? Healthy rivers, resilient communities, functioning ecosystems. But they often disagree profoundly about how to get there. You know, I learned this lesson firsthand in local government, representing communities along the Green River south of Seattle. And the green is many things at once. It's an urban river lined with homes and businesses. It's a major flood risk, and it's critical habitat for threatened Chinook salmon, our iconic king salmon here in Washington. At the time, I was serving as chair of the King County Flood Control District, trying to develop a long-term flood management plan for the river. And the challenge was straightforward to describe, but incredibly difficult to solve. How do you protect communities from catastrophic flooding while also restoring salmon habitat and meeting tribal treaty obligations? Everyone cared deeply about the river, but nearly everyone had different priorities. Cities worried about businesses and economic impacts. Environmental groups pushed for stronger habitat protections. The Army Corps focused on flood infrastructure. The state agencies all had their own independent regulatory responsibilities. The Muckleshoot tribe were co-managers of the fishery with legal standing and generations of stewardship and cultural connection to the river. And after years and years of failed attempts and stalled negotiations, trust between many of the parties had broken down. So we tried a different approach. I brought together leaders from the key agencies and interests, hired an experienced facilitator, and for more than a year we met twice a month, 2 hours at a time. And honestly, much of that work was not technical. It was relational. It was people slowly learning to trust one another enough to stay at the table. And I kept making the same argument. If we fail to reach agreement, there'll be no flood protection. If we fail to meet agreement, there will be no habitat improvements either. The process was slow, frustrating, and very unglamorous. But eventually, after years of gridlock, we reached agreement on a plan that protected public safety while also advancing habitat restoration and cooler water temperatures for salmon recovery. And that experience taught me something that I've carried with me ever since. Good science alone is not enough. Science is essential, but science by itself does not move policy. It does not automatically create trust. It does not automatically overcome polarization or fear or economic anxiety or institutional inertia. That requires relationships, communication, persistence, and people willing to stay at the table even when collaboration becomes frustrating. And that's why gatherings like this matter, because the work happening in rooms like this one we're in now cannot stay in rooms like this one. It has to move outward into communities, into policy, into public understanding, into implementation. I believe all of you have an increasingly important role to play, not just as researchers, but as translators, communicators, advocates for truth, and trusted voices in civic life. And I say that recognizing how difficult that has become in our current environment. We're living through a moment when expertise itself is sometimes treated with suspicion, when long-term thinking struggles to compete against short-term outrage, when institutions are being damaged and losing public trust, and when basic democratic norms and independent institutions that many of us once assumed were permanent suddenly no longer feel guaranteed. And I think it's important to say plainly that environmental stewardship does not exist separately from the health of our civic institutions. The work that all of us care about, protecting rivers, restoring habitat, preparing for climate change, managing public lands for future generations, depends on something larger than science alone. It depends on functioning democracy, on the rule of law, on independent courts, on free and fair elections, on freedom of speech, a free press, and the ability of people to assemble, advocate, organize, and hold institutions accountable. Because without those things, we lose the ability to shape the future of our own communities. Long-term stewardship becomes almost impossible. Public trust erodes, science becomes politicized, agencies become unstable, and the patient, collaborative work required to restore ecosystems across generations becomes harder and harder to sustain. It's not a coincidence that attacks on democratic institutions, scientific expertise, higher education, and environmental protections so often emerge from the same movements and the same political forces. They are connected. We are a nation of rivers and forests and mountains, just as surely as we are a nation of laws, freedoms, and democratic values. To care about one, ultimately, is to care about the other. The writer and environmentalist Terry Tempest once wrote, "The health of our public lands is the health of our democracy." I believe the inverse is true as well. The health of our democracy will determine the health of our public lands and waters in the decades ahead. And now, despite everything I've said, I remain optimistic. And the reason I remain optimistic is because I've seen what becomes possible when science, public investment, tribal leadership, and political will align. I saw it on the Pilchuck River. I've seen it in fish passage restoration projects. I've seen it in floodplain restoration efforts that reduce flood risk while improving habitat. I've seen it in partnerships where groups with very different interests found enough common ground to move forward together. Not perfectly, not without conflict, but successfully. At our State Department of Natural Resources, our Aquatics Division and world-class science teams are engaged in work ranging from salmon habitat restoration to estuary recovery to derelict vessel removal to aquatic monitoring, climate resilience, and so much more. But honestly, what gives me the most hope is not any single program. It's the growing recognition that ecological resilience and community resilience are inseparable. That healthy watersheds are not a luxury. They're infrastructure, public health infrastructure, economic infrastructure, climate infrastructure, cultural infrastructure. And I believe that understanding is growing, especially among younger generations. I don't know about you, but whenever I visit schools and meet with young people entering the field or spend time with student or youth environmental groups, I am struck by how deeply they understand the stakes of this moment. Not abstractly, personally. For many of them, climate change, ecosystem decline, and water scarcity are not just distant concerns, they are defining realities of the world they expect to inherit. And despite everything happening around them, I continue to be amazed by their seriousness, their optimism, and their willingness to engage. I think part of the reason that resonates so strongly with me is because I remember what first drew me into this work, myself, spending summers teaching environmental science to kids out on the coast of Puget Sound, leading treks through the North Cascade Mountains. Those experiences shaped how I saw the natural world, but they also shaped how I understood citizenship, stewardship, and responsibility to future generations. And today, when I talk with young people, I see that same sense of responsibility emerging again, often with an even greater urgency and clarity than my generation possessed at their age. So as all of you continue your work over the next few days, presenting research, debating methodologies, sharing findings, I hope you also think about the broader role that this powerful community can play in the years ahead. Because the future of freshwater systems will not be decided by science alone. It will be decided by whether societies are capable of acting on that science, whether we can build public trust, whether we can sustain long-term thinking, whether we can create partnerships durable enough to survive political cycles, whether we can move quickly enough to match the scale of change already underway. At this moment in history, silence and detachment are not forms of neutrality. If the scientific community does not actively help defend truth, public trust, democratic institutions, and long-term stewardship, those things will not defend themselves. And I know that can sound daunting, but then I think back to that morning on the Pilchuck River, to those massive trees being lowered into the water, to the almost immediate response of the ecosystem around them. The river remembered what it was designed to do. Now the question is whether we will act quickly and courageously enough to do the same. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the opportunity to join you this morning, and thank you for helping build a more resilient future for all of our watersheds and communities. Thank you.
We have time for a couple questions if anybody has a question.
We have a question.
Sorry, I'm just awestruck. That was amazing, amazing, and super inspirational. The state of Washington is in good hands. Do you all meet across the country like your counterpart? Is there a society of leaders of states in this space where you talk to each other about how to make a bigger change beyond the state? Thanks.
Not an active one. Only 5 states in the nation elect a state lands commissioner. And I have joked, in most states they're partisan, have to be partisan offices, and I serve as a Democrat, and only 2 of us are Democrats. So we did chat on the phone once about starting the Democratic Lands Commissioners Association. And she would be chair and I'd get to be vice chair. But no, there are some professional associations, but they're more focused really on the financial trust management. The trust managers get together. I'm barely over a year into the job, and I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose and learning about Washington State still. So I haven't really committed the time yet to build those national relationships. It's just, I'm still getting around to all of our counties and tribes and doing that work. But it's a weird system that we elect our director.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. I have a quick question for you. I'm over here.
Oh, there you are.
I have been an academic researcher for my entire career. What is one actionable thing that I can do maybe right now to help bridge that gap between the generation of knowledge and the actual action in our communities?
I think it is to make sure that you know who your elected officials are in your community and build an authentic relationship with them. And then that gives you tremendous power. Elected officials put constituents ahead of everyone else. You know, all politics is local. And when I was in the legislature, I could have lobbyists lined up outside the door, and somebody from my community shows up without an appointment. Everyone else gets bumped, and my constituent gets the attention. That's how most elected officials are. Yet so many people who care about public policy, who care about seeing science implemented, who care about what's in the budget of state and federal agencies, can't even name who their own elected officials are. So I think there is power in participating in that civic process, and it starts with knowing who that elected official is and building that relationship. Another thing, and this is because I'm talking to scientists, the problem elected officials have is not a lack of access to information. It's not, if giving us one more 12-page report isn't going to help. The problem is too much information. Elected officials are overloaded. We're generalists. Legislators, think of it, they're not just working on freshwater ecology, they're also working on school funding and pension systems and 1,000 other things. And so there's a tendency sometimes I found with people who are specialists to think, you know what, we have the data to show it now, if we could just get page 7 of the report in front. No, things are just in the legislative process are moving too quick. They're driven by political forces as much as information. And so building the kind of relationship with an elected official where there's some trust and where you feel comfortable calling and having a cup of coffee during the summer and to talk with them in plain language about your values and about the work you're doing and what you'd like to see from your government, I think that's the most powerful thing you can do.
Hello, Mr. Updegrove. Same back here. Oh. Thank you for being here. I am one of your constituents here in Washington, and I echo your feeling around watching a river return to expanding across its floodplains and responding to wood in its way. I work with beavers in Washington State, and I partner with DNR in my region, which is the Methow and Okanagan, Upper Columbia, regularly to do stream restoration, specifically focused on post-wildfire stream restoration. And I've been doing this work since 2019, a graduate of Eastern Washington's master's program in restoration ecology. And just this last couple years, DNR stopped letting us relocate beavers onto public lands. And that's across the entire state. I'm really curious, why is that happening? Because it is a keystone species, a native species that helps creeks and rivers remember what biodiversity, resilience to drought, to wildfire, to flooding. It helps them remember how to help our communities be more resilient to all of these things. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I'd love to have more conversations later, but it's just been a real setback in our work.
And you sure it's DNR, it's not Department of Fish and Wildlife?
Absolutely. I work at the top levels of both WDFW and with legislators on trying to make changes happen for beaver management. And this one came out of the blue this year when we got our next round of funding and permitting started to start 14 more restoration projects.
I apologize, it's the first I've heard of it, so I'm not able to give you an informed answer today, but I am very happy to follow up with you.
I would love that.
I wasn't aware that we were prohibiting that, so.
Yeah, it was just this year that we were told this, and so I'm really excited to work with you on it if you're interested, and would love the attention on it.
If nothing else, this question is guaranteed that in the next couple of days I'm going to be getting a briefing on the topic.
Thank you very much.
So I look forward to working with you.
All right, everybody, let's thank Commissioner Up the Grove one more time. Thanks. All right, thanks, everybody. Have a great day.